Welcome to the Healing for Male Survivors podcast. This is a podcast for male survivors of sexual abuse and assault, whether as a child or as an adult. Know that you are not alone and the abuse was not your fault. My name is Mike Chapman. I'm a certified recovery life coach and also a survivor. Let's find hope and healing together. Welcome to the Healing for Male Survivors podcast. I'm your host, Mike Chapman, and with me today is Marcus Spaur. I'll introduce him in a moment. And if you would like to join us live for future podcast recordings, you can find out more on how to join us at polarlifeconsulting.com/live. And let me introduce my dear friend, Marcus Spaur, who is a certified recovery coach, a certified inner child recovery process specialist, Brainspotting Practitioner, is a coach with his own business Between the Covers Coaching, and that's book covers to clarify. He is also, like me, a podcast host. His podcast is Between the Covers Podcast with Marcus Spaur, which can be found on most podcast platforms, and the video version of his podcast is also available on YouTube. And he recently interviewed me, so you can find his interview of me on his podcast. And again, my very dear friend who I'm so thrilled to have on the podcast. And he has his own story of abuse that he'll go into. And the theme for his podcast, he loves to get into people's stories to help them become the heroes in their own story. And I love that so much. And I listen to his podcast and he listens to mine. And it's wonderful. He has a unique perspective on things. So give him a listen when you get a chance. And we're going to start like we do most episodes with 4 questions. Now it's time for 4 questions, that part of the podcast when we get to know our guest a bit better by asking a few questions. Let's go. So, Marcus, what is your favorite food memory?
Oh, man, my favorite food memory. I was thinking so much about these questions, and this was the one that just kept slipping my mind. But I think probably one of my favorite food memories was back when I was in college. I was driving back home, and I had this rickety truck that couldn't go over the passes on the mountains here in southeastern Washington
Right. I know
without.
it's hilly. Yes, I grew up in Oregon,
Yeah,
and yes, very,
yeah,
very hilly.
it's pretty hilly, and some of them are much grander than others. And I had this truck that if I tried to push it too much as I was going uphill, it would just transmission fluid would just pour on the catalytic converter, and white smoke would
Oh,
just come pouring out from under this truck. So I had to find other ways to get back home. And during this one year, I would usually take this really bold path through. I would usually take this beautiful path along a river, but it was so cold I didn't want to be sliding on ice or anything.
right.
So I took a different route to get home, and I remember I had with me, I'm just driving by myself. I've got this wonderful music, and I have one of my favorite beverages of all time, eggnog. And
Right.
I call eggnog the nectar of the gods. It's one of
Oh,
my.
I agree. I love eggnog. And maybe it's the Santa in me, but yes, and we've already bought it. We're recording at the end of October, and we already purchased it. We've got a little container in the fridge right now, and my wife and I both love it.
I unfortunately have not been able to enjoy eggnog yet this year, even though I saw it in like late September is when it started showing up
Right.
at our grocery store because I am trying to have the best numbers I can for some blood work with my doctor, and that's
Ah,
going to
yeah.
take place. That's going to take place in early December. So I have to hold off. I don't
Yeah.
want to.
You
I miss
can't
the nectar of the gods,
you
but
can't nog it up
I
just
can't
yet.
nog it up. But
Yeah.
I remember just having some eggnog, driving down this beautiful winding path to get back home. It was dark and it was snowing, and I've just got my favorite beverage with me, and it was just wonderful.
Wonderful. And I know those Cascade Mountains, all those Pacific Northwest mountain ranges are just beautiful to drive through. Absolutely. What is your favorite Christmas or holiday memory?
So I forgot to ask you beforehand. Do
Hmm.
birthdays count as holidays?
They do.
Okay, perfect.
Absolutely.
I have I have one of the best memories, and this was something that absolutely shocked me. My primary love language is gift giving. And
Ah.
so my wife Libby is very attuned to things that are going to delight and surprise me. And so this one year for my birthday, I had this box, and I'm like, it was this long, narrow box. I had no clue what this thing was. And this was the first time that Libby gave me a present that when I opened it, my breath was taken away. Bear in mind, I have received like some very awesome video games. I have received like virtual reality headsets and stuff from her and her
Hmm.
family and everything. I have received bows and arrows to practice on my archery backdrop that I can't see right now because my blinds are shut, but it's just right out there in my backyard. And yet, I open this box and I pull out what I have learned is a sakabato. It is a Japanese style katana, but it is sharpened on the reverse side.
Hmm.
And this ties into one of the heroes I've yet to research and share on my podcast, but this character named Kenshin Himura, who is an assassin during this, I think it was like the Edo into the Meiji period of Japan. But he was an assassin. He was very good at what he did. And after he helped with this revolution, he couldn't cope with the kind of loss of life that he contributed to, so he made a promise to himself that he was never going to take a life again, and so he used a sakabato, so if he ever struck a killing blow to someone, it was going to injure but not kill.
Hmm.
And so I was just I saw this and I opened it, I pulled it from its scabbard and I was just like I literally couldn't breathe. It was such a shock and I still have it on my sword wall over here.
Wow. So yeah, that's huge. That's nice. And I've had a lot of not necessarily great gifts over the years between wacky ties that my kids picked out when they were little and that kind of thing. But to have a gift that just touches your heart in a big way, that's wonderful. Absolutely. And I love when that happens. So, what is your favorite church or house of worship memory?
I would say my favorite memory would be mine and Libby's wedding day. And
Oh.
one of the things there's a lot tied into this, but we went to it was an old Presbyterian church that
Mm.
my father-in-law used to be the pastor of. I mean, beautiful stained glass windows and everything. This took place in May, and so it was just a lot of good natural light and everything. And being able to see my partner come up and do the reveal, and she's just got the biggest smile on her face and everything, and just going into this beautiful ceremony and taking that incredible step in our journey together. And on top of that, I believe that is the only time I have ever heard video game music played over a church's loudspeakers because we had certain points where we agreed on the music that we were going to play. And I loved it. I'm a gamer, so I love my video games. And one of the things is there's this fanfare music that plays in the franchise Final Fantasy. And as soon as the pastor, who was my uncle, announced that we were husband and wife, I so badly wanted to play that fanfare and have us both like strike a pose. But that was the one thing that she didn't budge on. She's like, no, I don't want to do that.
Yes.
But everything else was just great. I loved it.
How beautiful. Yeah, that sounds nice. What is your favorite scripture or any inspirational quote that has helped you on your spiritual journey? And what about it speaks to you?
There is this one quote that I have heard that actually my therapist was the one who helped me kind of tie who said this because it was on her
Hmm.
calendar. It's a quote from Zig Ziglar
Okay.
where he says, "You don't have to be great to start, but you have to start to be great."
Oh, yes. I've heard you say that several
I
times.
tell myself that every single day. And one of the things that I find I oftentimes can fall into an all or nothing kind of mindset. I feel
Hmm.
like I have to do it perfectly. If I can't do it perfectly, then I don't do it. And this helps me to reframe that to be like, I need to start. I'm going to do it imperfectly. I'm going to make mistakes along the way. However, the only way that I'm going to achieve this greatness, this potential that I have within me, is I just need to take whatever that next step is.
Right.
And so I remind myself I don't have to be great to start, but I have to start to be great.
Absolutely. I love that. And since you have become great, let's hear the start of your story. And would love to know your journey, the trauma you faced, and how you've overcome it. And I know a lot of stories jump in time. I know mine does. So, whatever you need to do to get the story out, time jumps and all, feel free. And then I would love to know more about your healing journey, what you've done to find healing, what has worked, and what things you've tried that hasn't worked. And then would love to know more about what you're doing now with your podcast and your coaching and all the other ways you are involved in helping other people.
Awesome. Well, how much time do we got here?
As much time as you need.
So, my story begins where I am the youngest in my family,
Mhm.
and I am the youngest of three boys, and I'm the youngest by 4.5 minutes because I am an identical twin, and my twin brother was the one who came out first. And so, growing up a lot, he tried to usurp authority and be like, well, I'm the older brother, and I just take him out. It
Right.
was it was amusing. But a big part of my journey does involve, or a big part of my story involves my twin brother.
Right.
Because one of the things that is different about, I think it's like 2% of the population in the world are twins. So
Mm.
we're a
Right.
rather small subset of the population. But one of the things that is very interesting about a twin relationship is I had a best friend since the day I was born.
Mm.
In fact, I have even heard it said, and I've borrowed for myself, that I had a womb mate and womb
Yes.
mate. So growing up, I always had this very close bond with my twin brother. And my parents, they did their best trying to raise, two monkeys at the same time because my lord, the stories I hear, we were literally monkeys.
Right.
And one of the things that I I remember is what one of us couldn't do, both of us could.
Right.
Absolutely crazy. And so we would get into shenanigans. We'd get into places that we shouldn't be. We, at one point, ended up having like an entire mall locked down because they couldn't find us and they thought maybe we were kidnapped when we were just hiding in the middle of this clothes rack and everything. And all of the other times we did that, we were always they would hear us snickering and laughing and everything. And this one time we were dead silent. And so the entire mall was like literally locked down for like a half an hour before they finally found us.
Wow. Did you get in trouble after?
Yeah, of course we did. And so I grew up having a partner in crime, having
Mm.
someone that I always knew was going to be there. And it was a very different experience than I
Mm.
know a lot of people have had. If I
Right.
had bad days, I always had my twin brother. He was
Mm.
always there. I always knew he was going to have my back. I would always have his. And it was when we were about 7 or 8 years old. I had a family member who unknowingly, this was not something that was premeditated, but we were visiting my grandfather's place, and I had this older family member who found it was like a penthouse or a Playboy magazine in my grandfather's bedroom, bathroom, wherever it was that he had it. And he brings it out to me and my twin brother. And he's like, hey guys, look at what I just found. And he starts kind of thumbing through it. And this was my first exposure to pornography. And I can still vividly recall the most profound image that I would portray as the first pornographic image that I saw. And it was a woman who was, you could only see from like her stomach up. She was completely exposed, had her arms over her head, lying down on this bed that had like these red silk sheets and had rose petals around her, and her breasts are just there for the whole world to see.
Right.
And I still can vividly recall that image. And I even remember after the magazine was put away, because after a while, this family member, I believe his conscience kicked in and was like, I probably shouldn't be showing you guys any of this. So he goes and he puts it back. And I remember trying to go like later. It was either that same day or it was another time. I remember going into my grandfather's bedroom and snooping around trying to find it.
Hmm.
Thankfully, I didn't, but that planted a seed. That
Right.
planted a seed within me.
How old were you when you had that first porn
I
exposure?
was about 7 or 8 years old.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, that's
And
so young. And your brain at that age is not ready to even understand or comprehend that. But they say nowadays with the internet and cell phone use, the average age of porn exposure for boys is 7 or 8.
mm,
That's average because, yeah, they can go to school and someone brought their cell phone and they can pull it up on the cell phone and they can shove it right in your face without you even being able to say no.
and on top of
Yes.
that, you can be on your phone just doing some mundane or completely wholesome thing, and then porn advertisements will just
Yep.
pop up all the time. It
Absolutely.
just,
Even in family friendly games, because I do little low impact mobile games and they have all kinds of misogynistic, scantily clad, animated females or other things, just disturbing. And
mhm.
I'm not shocked anymore, but yeah, it's horribly disturbing, but is what they classify as non-contact sexual abuse because your brain was not in a place to be able to process those images and it was abusive to have that. So it's not necessarily the other kid who got a hold of it. It's the grown-up's responsibility who brought it and didn't. It's like having a loaded gun in the house. You need to be responsible and keep that stuff locked up so that it stays out of the hands of children who are not at an age where they can deal with it.
And at the same time, because I've even spoken with my mom about
Hmm.
this, and she was even like, I don't know why we weren't around. I don't know how that happened, how you guys had all of that time by yourselves in the house to be able to do something like that. And she actually apologized to me for
Right.
that. But when I was talking with her about it, because it was her dad, it was his house, and she just looked at me and she said, but you know what? Even if we were there, he had a very different view about that.
Mm.
He would have looked at it and been like, oh, it's not that big of a deal.
Right.
Because he just had a different view about pornography and sex and everything like that. To where if this family member did bring the magazine out and my mom would have been aghast, he'd be like, oh, just the whole let the boys be boys. It's not doing them any harm. And yet it turns out, no, that's actually quite harmful.
Right.
And that's not the only experience that I've had, because later on, this was when I was probably getting to be 12 or 13 years old, somewhere around
Hmm.
there. Every now and again, my brothers and I would want to go camp, but my
Mm.
parents either didn't have the time or anything, so we would camp in our backyard.
Right.
And so I remember we set up the tent in our backyard, and the same family member who is older, had just discovered what happens when he stimulates his penis and starts getting an erection. And for some reason, my twin brother and I had gone back in the house for something. Maybe we needed to get something to drink or use the bathroom or something. And we come back out, and this family member is in the tent and it's closed up. And we start to come in, and this family member is like, oh, wait, hold on, hold on. I'm not ready for you guys to come in. I want to show you guys something.
Mm.
Okay. All right, go ahead and come on in. And so we open up the tent, and there's this family member with his pants down, and he's like, "Hey, I want to show you guys what something cool that I just found out." And he starts pulling on his penis, and it goes from being
Mm.
very flaccid to being erect. It's like, "Hey, that's pretty cool, isn't it?" Go flaccid. He'd pull on it some more and go erect. I'd never seen anything like that. I'd never experienced anything like that. It didn't go beyond that.
Right.
But again, that still planted a seed. I became curious. Well, what happens if I were to do the same thing to myself? Well, it actually feels quite good. And then as soon as puberty hits, I end up having an ejaculation. Oh,
Mm.
this is absolutely gross. I don't ever want to do this again, but it felt really good.
Right.
And those two experiences happening before puberty and even before, maybe not before we had like any kind of a sex talk. I'm so grateful that my parents were not those that had the sex talk where you only have the one singular sex talk.
Mhm.
We would actually get together quite often, and my parents would be like, do you guys have any questions for us? They would sit us down and talk with us about our developing bodies and puberty and this kind of stuff. Even then, I still had a lot of shame
Mm.
because what I was doing, it felt really good whenever I did it. I was able to get over the grossness factor of it because it happened when I had a wet dream, the first ever
Right.
wet dream I had. And I remember having to go clean myself up afterwards. I'm like, this is disgusting. I don't ever want to have to deal with this again. But that didn't stop me. And I continued to masturbate, and I had a very vivid imagination. I didn't really need pornography. But
Right.
as soon as we got our first PC at home, and back in the day when we didn't have high speed internet, it was dial up,
Mm.
and you would try and look at pictures online, and you're waiting for it as it's line by
Right.
line, pixels at a time going through, and you're just waiting to see what's on the other side. I just got lost in this pit, this mire,
Right.
where I kept pursuing something that made me feel really good, but I also would feel terrible afterward.
Mm.
And I even remember one time my twin brother and I both struggled with this. And
Mhm.
we called our dad into our room. And by this point, I shouldn't have been sharing a bedroom with my twin brother, but we still were sharing a bedroom. And we just confessed to our dad, it's like, this is something that we're doing and we feel really bad about it. What's my dad do? He just sits down on the edge of one of our beds and he's just like, kids, you guys aren't doing anything wrong. And goes on this explanation of what we're doing is natural and how when we're married and our wives are pregnant, that for 9 months you're not going to be able to have sex. So you got to do something in order to take care of that, blah, blah, blah. These things that meant nothing to me. I
Right.
wasn't thinking about getting married. I wasn't thinking about relationships. I didn't even want to have a girlfriend at the time.
Mhm.
And yet my dad was saying what I was doing was okay. And yet I felt so horrible afterward. It wasn't explained to me, but deep down, I knew that this objectification, this seeing what I shouldn't see, of these other women or what I'm imagining of these women,
Mhm.
that wasn't something that I should be doing. And so I had this turmoil inside of me no, what I'm doing is okay. My dad said it was okay. But after every single time, it's like, I felt terrible and
Right.
I could not reconcile that. And the big thing that drove me to this behavior is when I was in middle school. Growing up, my twin brother and I, we both had long hair. We both had mullets, if I'm honest. Yes, I have photographic image in my dad's house of me with a mullet. It exists. I know I had it. But when we got into middle school, because I still live in a very conservative area of southeastern Washington state.
Hmm.
And when we go into middle school, by the spring of our first year of middle school, my twin brother, he's like, I can't take this anymore. There's so much bullying. I'm getting all of this negative attention because I have this long hair. And he cut his hair.
Right.
And I must have had like an extra thick, stubborn bone in my body that just made me be like, no, I'm not going to do this. I like having my long hair. But that made me the only boy in the school that had long hair.
Mm.
That put a bullseye on me.
Right.
I found a lot of discrimination and criticism, especially from my male peers. I even
Mm.
found some of that with my teachers. And I was referred to as a girl. I was called every single homophobic name in the book. I was queer. I
Right.
was a fag. I was gay, whatever.
Right.
And I received so much hostility from the men in my life. And it wasn't even just those at school. This
Hmm.
even followed me home
Mm.
because after a while, my two brothers, they would come up behind me and they'd grab my ponytail and just yank on it just to get me
Wow.
to, scream as they're pulling my head back. And that happened so much, it just got to the point where I just stopped responding.
Mm.
It'd just like be like, just pull my hair back and my head would go back, but I wouldn't yelp anymore. It took the fun out of it, but they were criticizing me for this choice. My dad would come up behind me and he would lift up my ponytail and he'd say, "Hey, what's underneath a horse's tail?"
Yeah.
Yeah, he was calling me a horse's ass. That was not good attention for me.
Right.
And this continued through all of middle school. I was going through the worst experience of bullying in my life. And pornography and masturbation became more tools to cope with all of this unacceptance, all of this criticism and discrimination, along with food and video games.
Right.
And one of the things that I have shared is the dynamic of the connections that I had with my peers growing up made it so that the kind of pornography that I would view didn't involve men at all. Why would I want them in this thing that makes me feel good? And so I have shared with individuals who struggle with unwanted same sex attraction, where as I started my journey and I'm hearing these people share about finding themselves attracted to men and wanting to work through that, I'm like, man, I don't know. I don't know how I'd be able to help someone with something like that. But as soon as I started hearing their stories, I'm like, it's so similar to mine. But it's like we hit this
Right.
very crucial crossroad and they went one direction where it's like I'm fawning after this masculine attention and I went the other way. I'm running the hell away from it. I
Wow.
don't want anything to do with this kind of attention. I am going to focus just on the feminine attention. It
Right.
also doesn't help that growing up, I was referred to as a crybaby a lot, something that I would later discover was empathy, is empathy. I am naturally an empath. I feel emotions, my own and others, very strongly. And that was something that wasn't accepted. Not in an area where it's expected that men and boys are rough and tumble and they're into sports and they don't cry. And I cried a lot. It was easy to make me cry.
Right.
And so that was just another thing where I wasn't accepted, especially by those who presented themselves in this very alpha male masculine way.
Right.
I really struggled with what it was for me to be a man growing up.
Mm.
And this problem persisted all through high school, all through college. I would say that college was the most porn free time that I'd ever been in my life since it became a part of my life.
Hmm.
But that was because I was too poor to have my own internet. I would always go
Right.
to the campus library, use their internet to do what I needed. It didn't stop the masturbation. It didn't stop the
Right.
fantasizing. It didn't stop the objectification. And after I graduated from college, I ended up meeting this most wonderful woman.
Mm.
My partner Libby
Mhm.
is someone that my best friend from the first grade and his wife wanted to get the two of us together.
Interesting.
They were a part of a video game club at their college. They had been dating for a while, and they're like, "Do you know of anyone that Libby would really get along with?" And my friend Kyle is like, I've got this friend. His name is Marcus. The problem is she was closer to the Idaho border, and I was more in central Washington
Ah,
at the
okay.
time. And
So
so it
that's a
would
good
take,
3 or 4 hours drive.
no, it was going to be more like, I mean, just getting back to where I grew up was an almost 2 hour ordeal, and then it's like 5 hour or 4 hours to get to her college.
Wow. Wow.
I probably could have routed a different way, but this was before GPSs were like really a
Right.
thing where you'd have to like print out MapQuest directions in order to get
Right.
to things.
Right.
So my friend
Not as many interstates, not as many bypasses, so probably a lot of back roads and whatnot.
yeah.
Yes.
And so my friend was like, you know what? I think Marcus and Libby would really get along well, but I don't think it'd be a good thing to introduce them because we don't know how that distance is going to pan out.
Mm.
Well, long story short, I meet Libby at my best friend's wedding. And I'm going to go in the story anyways,
Go
because
for it.
I love this story. This could be a rom com kind of story.
Mm.
I had
A meet
just,
cute.
yes, I had just broken off with this young woman in Florida. We were having a long distance relationship, and I was trying to move down to Florida, try and get a teaching job over there because that's what my education was in. And
Right.
nothing was working. Nothing, nothing, nothing. And so eventually we're like, you know what? This isn't going to work. And I'm just like, at this point, I'm like 24, 25 years old. And I'm like, you know what? This just isn't worth it. I'm just going to be
Mhm.
single the rest of my life because we all make the best decisions when we're in our early mid 20s after having a heartbreak, right? And my mom had even told me, it's actually very common for people of your age to meet their future spouses when they're going to like their friends' weddings. And I'm like, Mom, no. No, I don't want to hear this right now. So I was one of the groomsmen and I go to the wedding having a great time. And I had committed to myself I was going to dance, but not to any of the slow songs. I
Mm.
had no partner to dance with, and I didn't care to find someone.
Mm.
So, whenever the DJ starts playing music and it's meant to be slower and more intimate, no, I'd go sit down,
Mm.
go eat some food, have
Right.
some punch or whatever. And then
Right.
as soon as there's more of a peppy, more, dance as a group kind of song, I would jump in and we would just have a great time. And then at the end of the night, the DJ comes on the mic and says, "All right, everyone, this is the last song of the night. So come on out here and support the new husband and wife," and starts playing a slow song.
Right.
I'll be damned if I still wasn't in the mood to dance in that moment.
Hmm.
And so I'm looking around. I was dancing with someone and she had totally disappeared. And all of a sudden I turn around and there's this woman sitting in a chair on the edge of the dance arena. And I just extend my hand out. I'm like, "Would you like to dance?" And she's like, "Sure." That was Libby.
Oh.
So we start dancing. I'm learning about her, she's learning about me, and apparently while we are doing this, we did not see this, but my best friend and his new wife just had the biggest grins on their faces because they're like Marcus and Libby met. And that started this whirlwind of a time where Libby and I were getting to know each other, started dating, we get engaged, we get married a year after her brother, who was 7 years older than her. We heard
Right.
from her parents, we had our kids 7 years apart so we wouldn't have to pay for two weddings 1 year after another. Why'd you miss the memo? But I was also one of those who was foolish enough to think that the reason why I had this problem was is all about sex. I get married. It's like, hey, I have this lovely partner. I have someone I can have sex with. This problem's going to go away. I almost
Surprise.
I almost ruined our marriage within the first month
Right.
because she goes out for a job interview and the job interview was a lot shorter than I had expected a job interview to be. And she comes back home to our apartment, and I'm in the living room with my pants down with the laptop there looking at pornography.
Mm.
Crushed her,
Right.
absolutely crushed her. And I wish that that was where like my true journey in recovery came about. I just got better at hiding it. I tried seeking therapy and it didn't work.
Mm.
And this is important for anyone who is hearing this. This is important. When
Right.
you're looking for a therapist, make sure you look for someone who has experience in what you have to work through.
Yes,
I
absolutely.
I did not meet with a therapist who had any experience working with any kind of unwanted sexual behavior, whether we're
Right.
calling it a compulsion or an addiction. She had no experience with that. So it was very unhelpful for me.
Right.
We tried. I just was trying to do everything I could to not hurt my wife again,
Right.
which is totally the wrong mindset to have because when they find out, it's going to hurt. It wasn't until about 9 or 10 years ago that I was invited to a friend's church where they were having this group called Pure Desire.
Mm.
Never heard of it. They're like, they knew of the struggle that I had. They had the very similar struggle, and they're like, it might be something that's really helpful. I'm like, sure, I'll go and try it out. And in the stereotypical addict's fashion, an hour before I go to the first Pure Desire meeting at my friend's church, I'm in the bathroom masturbating one more time because this might be the last time I ever do this. So I may as well get one
Right.
more in for the round.
Yes, as a lot of addicts do on their way to getting help. Yes, it's like one last
Yeah.
drink or one last whatever. Yes,
Yeah. This is probably going to be the last one. So
right.
capitalize on it.
Enjoy it. Yes.
And that started a journey that has been going on almost 10 years now.
Wow.
This was back in 2015. And I was 34 going on 35 at the time. And I wish I'd found some of this much sooner. I know a
Right.
part of your story is like you couldn't find anything.
Right.
And I just really dove into this. I was diving into my story. I was utilizing some of these tools that I was learning. I still share with some of my clients that in terms of how the Conquer series with Pure Desire, that's what we were going through.
Right.
With how they set that up, it was like in the second to last DVD when they introduced the deep breathing to help calm yourself down when you're dysregulated or you're wanting to go act out, the wonderful restart on your brain so you can make better choices. As soon as I learned that tool, I'm like, why didn't you guys have this in DVD one? Do you realize how much easier it would have been for me weeks before?
Right.
And so whenever I'm working with individuals, I'm all about the practicality.
Right.
That's one of the things I want people to know. Here are some tools that have worked for me. Try them out, see if they work for you. And I have continued over the last 10 years of just finding tools and adding them to my tool belt of journaling, of having a safe community or a safe space to be able to talk about what I'm struggling with, to
Right.
be able to process my story. This was a big thing for me in my recovery. I stepped in to facilitate my own men's recovery group at my previous church.
Hmm.
And I was working in a print shop at the same place that my wife worked at.
Right.
She used to be the one running the print shop. She moved on to a different team, was doing some other work. I got brought on. I'd worked there. It was only supposed to be 2 weeks, but 6 months later, I'm still coming in and helping as like a temporary contracted employee. And Libby moves away. I come into this position, and we have these industrial cutters that they have like a 20 or 22-inch long blade
Right.
that can be like razor sharp. And they're called guillotine blades
Right.
because you put a stack of paper in there, you press some buttons, and it just comes down and it just cuts like
Right.
thick stacks of paper.
Right.
Well, I had to clean the blade because it was gummed up from all of this adhesive. And I get it all cleaned up, and then I can't remember how to put this thing back in the machine.
Mm.
I'm trying. Nothing seems to work. I just can't seem to figure it out. And I end up bringing the clamp down. It hits the tool, bends a little bit. And I'm just like distraught. It's like, why can't I remember? So I just go down the hall, go to Libby's office, and I'm like, can you please help me? I can't get this blade back on. She's like, oh, yeah, you just do this, and is going through it with me again. Couldn't I remember that? I was so frustrated with myself, just trying to let it go, just trying to let it go. And I just can't. I can't let this go. I
Mm.
made a mistake. I almost ruined this machine.
Right.
And it was all because I was being dumb. I couldn't remember. And I was just like, why can't I let this go?
Mm.
And then I had this memory come up that I completely forgotten about. This was I may have been like 5 years old. I don't remember exactly how old I was, but I go with my family and we visit the first ever parish home that my grandfather was the pastor of.
Mm.
And we go, it was like my dad and his two brothers and his sister, and we're all there and we're hearing these hysterical stories. And I remember walking on steps where I swore I was going to die on them because the steps were so small and they felt so steep that I was just going to slide off at any moment and hit my butt all the way down on these hard wooden stairs. And there was even the electrical outlet that still had charring, still had black on it from when my dad and his eldest brother convinced their younger brother to stick a magnet in the outlet.
Wow.
So we're hearing there's so much laughter and everything going on. And then there were some berry bushes that were across the way. And it's like, hey, let's go over there. We'll pick some berries. And, some people are wanting to have them to enjoy. Some people are wanting to keep them to make like jam or jellies later and everything. And I remember my twin brother and I were more in the camp of, find the good ones that we want to eat, not really caring too much about saving any of them. And then my dad comes by and just in a passing comment, he says, "You two are as worthless as tits on a board." And then he walks off. I don't remember what happened after that. For all
Mm.
I know, I repressed it or I cried to my mom about it because that's something that I would do. But all of a sudden, it's like, why couldn't I let this mistake go? Because
Right.
deep down, I believed I was as worthless as tits on a board.
Mm.
And therefore, even the smallest little mistake was unacceptable.
Right.
Oh, I found something deep in my story. I found something deep in my past that was influencing my present behavior, and I didn't even know it. And that's why it is so important for me to continue getting into my own story and
Right.
why I work with others because I'm on a journey of being the hero of my own story.
Hmm.
And whatever I can learn along the way, I want to help others with that same thing.
Right.
And so I have just continued down this road where I am learning more and more about what makes me tick. I am one of those few fortunate ones who has been able to reconcile with my dad and my mom over some of the harm that they have done. I have reconciled with other family who have hurt me in the past. I try and do everything I can now to help people find their inner strength so that they are not the victims in their stories. Because
Right.
I walked as a victim in my story for so long.
Mm.
And I want to help people move from victim to hero because we need more heroes in our world
Right.
today.
Absolutely. So you mentioned in your healing journey you've tried therapist, and it's a journey to find a good therapist if you need to, and it doesn't always work out right away, and you might have to go to several, or you might outgrow a therapist as you go deeper into your healing. They might not be ready to go that deep with you, and you might need someone else with more skill who can go through those deeper issues with, so you can outgrow a therapist for sure, or they might move on, or you might move on. So, yeah, it's okay. And it's okay to try out therapists. And they have the right to fire you, and you have a right to fire them if things don't work out, or the situation changes and they're less effective than they used to be for whatever reason. So definitely give yourself permission to try them out and interview if you're looking for a new therapist. All kinds of resources to find someone. What else have you tried that has helped you, and what other things that you've found on your healing journey that didn't help that much or it worked against you?
Well, the first thing I can say that does not work is shaming and guilting.
Absolutely.
Does not help at all. I mean, let's face it. You and I both know if that was a useful and effective tool in stopping this behavior, we wouldn't be having this conversation right now.
Right.
I also tried accountability software
Hmm.
like Covenant Eyes. I know of X3 Watch and some others. The one that I used was Covenant Eyes. And I know many people have had successes with that.
Right.
It's it was a useful tool early on, but you also need to have the right people supporting you
Right.
because I had a lot of people that I would never hear anything from.
Mm.
Granted, I have been that ally too. I would
Right.
receive a report and it's like, oh, all right, nothing here. Delete the email, move on with my day. It didn't really spark any conversations.
Hmm.
Going through the I started with the Conquer series, and for me, that has been a great starting point for my
Hmm.
journey. It really puts a fire in your pants to be like, hey, this is something that I can do. But if you don't do anything with that fire, it will just smolder way too soon.
Right.
And so I also tried this workbook series. It was the one that I taught in my men's small group called Avenue, and it was a work at your own pace. We had a lot of people that were at different points in the books, and that was just not very effective. Getting into my story, where I think it was 2020, I end up hearing about husband material. I was at the time I was listening to the Pure Desire podcast, and they
Hmm.
interviewed Drew
Right.
from Husband Material, and I'm like, oh, you know what? This guy's got some very interesting things that he's sharing here, and he's got his own podcast. So I just subscribed to his podcast, and I voraciously ate every episode. I worked through his backlog in a matter of weeks, maybe. I was just taking it all in, and I hear about his academy that he was going to be launching, and I'm like, you know what? I want to get in on this. And I really started not just getting into my story, but getting into what are my fantasies trying to tell me.
Right.
I am a huge advocate and fan of getting into the details of our fantasies. And I always tell my clients that if we take a fantasy and you are vulnerable and you tell me everything about this fantasy, and then we remove all of the eroticism from it, what you're left with is the deep desire that you absolutely are trying to meet through that. And one
Mm.
of the things I always tell people, porn promises that it can meet those needs, but it just can't.
Right.
It just can't. And so The process that I learned from husband material of curiosity and compassion instead of shaming and guilting
Right.
has allowed me to turn my own story into one of the most powerful weapons to help people dissect their story. It has
Mm.
helped me to understand what makes me tick and why I turn to these things instead of it being like this absolutely unknown, obscure thing just off in the distance that I just never understood. But I was always scared of it. I
Hmm.
was always scared because it's like the next relapse is just around the corner. I think the best I was able to do through white knuckling was about 3 months. And I think I only achieved that like maybe once or twice. A lot of
Right.
times it's like after a week, I'm acting out again.
Mm.
And so the story work has been very powerful. Psychodramas have been powerful.
Right.
You've been there for one psychodrama. You missed out on the second one because we were in different houses.
Right. Right. Yes.
But
Yes.
you were there for one of my psychodramas where it unlocked my voice.
Right.
I felt like I had nothing to share. I felt like no one wanted to hear what I had to contribute, and I would just remain silent. I wouldn't have started my own podcast if it wasn't for finding my voice.
Right.
We wouldn't be having this conversation if it
And
wasn't for that.
realizing that what you have to say is of value because you are of value, and what you have to say is important and valuable.
Absolutely. And it has been almost 10-year process of
Mm.
working through that, of
Right.
discovering it, of figuring out why all of this stuff is buried so deep inside of me and how can I help it come out.
Right.
So the stories,
Hmm.
getting into our stories, I am always an advocate for that.
Absolutely. And so you're working now in coaching and doing all these things to help others heal. So, what has that journey been like now that you're working with others?
It's actually very fortuitous that you asked this question because I had a call that ended a half an hour before we started having our conversation,
Wow.
where I was meeting with this client and he came to the call with a different idea of what we were going to work on, but just as he was talking, something else came up to where in his experience, he had an absent father and experienced an unhealthy relationship with his mother. And one of his friends in his recovery group was like, "Man, you got to get angry about that." And he's like,
Right.
I can't get angry about it." And so we started talking about it, and I was asking questions, trying to get him to think. And the next thing I know, he's crying. And he's like, "I'm sorry, I'm getting so emotional talking about all of this." And I'm like, "You don't need to apologize. This is good. You're letting it out." He's like, "It's not anger. I'm not letting anger out." And I'm like, "You're letting grief out. Sadness is a part of grief. Anger is a part of grief." And guess what? As we continued to talk, and I created this safe space for him to be able to share and spew whatever was coming up from his story, he
Right.
started getting angry.
Mm.
And he started releasing that anger and was like, "Man, I feel like I'm being unfair to my dad." And I'm like, "You're not. Just let it out." He's like, "My
Right.
dad just wasn't there." And it was a beautiful experience of
Right.
just helping him to experience that level of emotional intelligence because that's a lot of what I do. Hey, we're running away from emotions. Let's stop
Right.
doing that. Let's experience them. Let's name them. Let's become comfortable with the uncomfortable emotions. I make a clear delineation. There are no good or bad emotions.
Right. Right.
We have comfortable and uncomfortable. And the ones
Yes.
that are uncomfortable tend to be the ones that we were not properly taught how to be with.
Right.
Sadness, anger, disappointment, rejection, those, what we feel when we experience that, oftentimes are like, "Nope, can't handle that. And so
Hmm.
I do everything I can to create a safe space for people to experience and identify whatever emotions come up.
Right. Right.
I wouldn't be able to do
Absolutely.
that if I didn't get into my story
Right. And confront your own emotions.
and
And
allow
it,
myself to cry.
right. Right. Healing tears. That emotions do not have value. There is no good or bad. They just are. And it's okay to give yourself the time and space to process emotions, to feel emotions, to let go of emotions. So if you need to cry, cry. If you need to punch something, hopefully not a living being, find healthy ways to get out that anger. Rage houses where it's a demo house, sledgehammer, they got all kinds of broken office equipment and go and smash things safely. That's so nice. Or go to some of these retreats where they let you get anger out in nice, safe ways where you can process these things. It's okay. It's okay to feel. It's okay. And it's healthy to let those things out.
It
Absolutely.
is. And one of the things, this is something I go to with almost every single client that I work with. It is the one thing from Jenna Ramiresma's Altogether You that
Hmm.
I reference all the time. Now, I'm not the most spiritual person, you know that.
Right.
But one of the things that she has in that book is that God did not give us the capacity to feel these emotions just to punish us for feeling them.
Right.
And so I remember that all the time.
Mm.
No, this is not a bad thing. I may not like it. Yeah,
Right.
I really might not like it. But that doesn't mean that it's bad. I will sit with it for as long as I can. And then when it gets to be too much, I'm going to go do something else, like maybe some chores or go out for a walk or go pet my dog or go get a hug from Libby or talk with a friend or an ally. Whatever it is, I will go take care of myself. And
Right.
then every single time I do that, I become more and more resilient and I can handle that uncomfortable feeling for longer until it just becomes, yeah, okay, yeah, I know what this feels like. This is disappointment. Hi, disappointment. Glad you came to visit again.
Right.
Or whatever the
Yeah.
feeling happens to be.
All valid feelings. And I
Mm-hmm.
love the feelings wheel because a lot of us men have problems even identifying what we're feeling and those different feeling wheels that are out there. And I'll put those in the show notes too. I'll give you some links to those. There's some really good ones out there helping you to narrow down from the very general mad, sad, glad to very, very specific. And some have scriptures, some don't, but fine tuning describing how you're feeling because maybe it's not mad, indignation that something bad happened and you're upset because something bad happened, not necessarily to you, but to someone else. And that's okay. And then, you can narrow that down even further and find those words. It's like, yeah, no, it's not that. No, it's more of this. Okay, yeah, that. And you can find better descriptor words for how specifically you're feeling. And that helps to even understand, it broaden your vocabulary to understand the different kinds of emotions that we go through.
Yeah, so I do a lot of emotional intelligence work. I
Mm.
do a lot of story work. I haven't done a whole lot of brain spotting since I finished the phase
Maybe
one.
I throw it as a tool, and I still work full time, so I don't have a huge caseload either. But I will use it as a tool after so many sessions, and it's like, well, let's do brain spotting again. Um, and I just use it as a tool with my clients, and it is really cool. It's that
It really
weird
is.
mumbo jumbo stuff, but it works really well. I mean, I understand in theory, but it shouldn't work as good as it does, but it really does. And we don't do much. We just kind of guide the process and stuff happens. And you're going, okay, okay, yeah, it's weird. So, yeah, ask either of us. We're both brain spotting providers, and it's a cool tool. It really is. And
It
can
is.
definitely help with healing all kinds of different big traumas, little traumas, anything that has happened that is getting in your way. And any final thoughts for that listener out there?
I am all about affirmations.
Hmm.
So over the last 4 odd years that I have been a coach myself, there have been some I've picked up some themes about some of these self-limiting beliefs.
Mm,
And
right.
so I just want to speak to some of those. First off, for all of you guys out there, I want to tell you you're worth it. You
Mm,
really are. You are worth the time, you're worth the space, you're worth the investment, whatever it is that you need to get to where you want to be, you are worth it.
right.
And on that same note, it is going to be hard. None of this is easy, but the things that are hard are typically the most beneficial for us to do.
Mm,
Just know that when you're coming across challenges, there's roadblocks, seems like the hurdles just keep getting bigger and bigger, that's a good thing because that means you're doing something important.
right.
And you don't have to do this alone.
Mm,
There are so many people out there that are willing to help, that are willing to walk with you. I have awesome friends that I play Dungeons and Dragons with almost every other week, and
right.
they have become some of my greatest fans and supporters. And I have been
Mm,
able to return that favor to them. And life is so much better when you have that kind of community and those people who are willing to support you through the good times and through the difficult ones.
right. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, my dear friend, for coming and sharing your story. And it's a different perspective, but yes, even though it's non-contact abuse is the label for it, it's still bad. It's still traumatic, and it can still cause all kinds of chaos in your life until you can find healing. And I'm so thankful you have found healing. And you are the hero of your own story. And your story is powerful and inspires others to find healing. So thank you so much for joining me tonight. And we'll see you next time on the Healing for Male Survivors podcast. If you would like to learn more about my coaching with Polar Live Consulting, where I provide one-on-one coaching and group coaching, both with a focus on healing for male survivors, reach out to me at polarliveconsulting.com. That is Polar spelled Polar. I would love to hear from you. I want to hear your story. If you would like your story featured on this podcast, contact me via my website. If you like this podcast, please rate and review because that's how other people can find me, and I really want to spread this message of healing and hope to others. And remember, you are not alone. Healing is possible, and the abuse was not your fault. Let me repeat that. The abuse was not your fault. See you next time on the Healing for Male Survivors podcast.